Alright guys, on the right is the stock Fox Body MAF sensor, complete with screen and everything. It's got a screen that's held in by a snap ring. The MAF sampling happens from that hole in the top where the MAF sensor reaches down into that hole with its tonsils and measures the air going through that top hole and then estimates how much is going through the bottom hole based on that. And it's got both of them, the aftermarket one and the stock one, have this bracketry where you can bolt the bracket up to the bottom of the MAF using 3 bolts. We don't always do that because if you use a rigid inlet pipe, that can be a problem. But both of these MAFs have that same 3-bolt pattern on the bottom. The MAF on my left is a C&L 76mm, one that I stock. The MAF on the right, stock Fox Body. And here is a good look of why the MAF is one of the first things we do on a Fox Body. Now for a little visual aid, I thought I would take a tennis ball and show you how it goes into that one and the amount of room left over that it falls down into this one. Since the tennis ball didn't quite make it out, we're going to use a golf ball. As you can see, the golf ball takes up at least the larger portion of the entire hole in the MAF where airflow goes through, which is ridiculous. The hole is about the size of a racquetball, somewhere between a golf ball and a tennis ball. And that's the amount of room it takes up in a 76. Now, I did some measuring. The stock 3-inch inlet tube is about the same size, a little bit smaller than the 76mm housing. They butt up against each other if you put the inlet tube up to that. So as rubbery and lame as the stock inlet tube is, it's nothing compared to the restriction of the MAF itself. Lembo, that's not good for the sensors. Buddy, the sensor doesn't read in that part. The sensor is protected, and it's up here in this hole. I don't know if you can see that hole, but sensor's in that part. Otherwise, I wouldn't be dropping it in there. There's nothing inside a Fox MAF at all as far as sensors and wires. And this C&L does not have the sensor put on it yet. So there's nothing there to damage, just 2 pieces of aluminum. Anyhow, that's it. I thought I would show you guys the difference, and I wanted to film that and take some pictures of it too. But that's them, man, side by side. Humongous difference between 55mm and 76mm. And some of you guys that are familiar with these things know the 94 and up, 94, 95 5-liter takes the larger 70mm housing. So while they did put a larger, hole for the MAF, it's still not nearly as big as a 76 with nothing in it at all, except for a small sample tube. The 70mm doesn't have that same design. It has a big bar down the middle of it like this. So to compensate for the sensor bar, which was a redesign of the MAF sensor, they made the hole bigger so air would go around the bar. But going from 55mm Fox to 70mm SN95 5-liter MAF is useless because all you're doing is making the hole bigger to go around the new bar, and you end up with just about the same net airflow as you did with the stock 55mm. So don't let the name fool you. The 70mm stock MAF on a 94-95 is nothing special. And in fact, they use the same MAF on the V6. This guy, on the other hand, completely aftermarket with no divider bars in the middle, just one small sample tube. The air actually goes through that sample tube, and the sensor sits down in it. The tonsils come down and poke through into this hole, kind of like the 94-95 MAF does. And the cool thing about the C&Ls that I like is that the sample tube there is just held on by these 2 Allen bolts that are hidden underneath the sensor. And so we can swap out the sample tube for any tube we want and change the calibration of the MAF. So it's better to buy the $46.95 sample tube than it is to buy a whole new MAF or have it recalibrated, which makes the C&L very versatile. I guess while I'm at it, I might as well address this other thing. The C&Ls have gotten a bad reputation over the years a little bit from being not running well. But take a look at what's happening here. The C&L is a solid cast aluminum hunk of material that's super thick. You could drive over this thing with a car and not hurt it. There's nothing here to fail. The only thing they've done here is they've enlarged this thing, and then they take the stock sensor off of the Fox body and they screw it on to the C&L 76. When you put this same sensor that's normally going through this hole here and representing the airflow that goes through this part of the hole, and you put it in this big old thing, it leans your car out a lot. Even the smallest calibration is about 46 pounds a minute, and it's largely, what am I trying to tell you here? It's largely a great idea because they retain the OEM Ford electronics that way. And here's one of the two stock sensors I used on a Fox body, E9ZF-AA or F1ZF-AA. And they put it in AFH 55 or airflow housing 55 millimeter. Taking that same sensor, putting it on this one, makes the sensor electronically larger, as well as making the MAF housing physically larger. So you get lots more airflow through this MAF, and you also get lots more range from the MAF sensor. So essentially what we're doing with like a 24-pound injector calibration in an aftermarket MAF, we can do the same thing by using a genuine Ford sensor in a larger housing. You can't just mix and match sensors and housings. You have to know what you're doing there. But what C&L did was they flow tested a bunch of different aftermarket MAF sizes like this with different calibration tubes in it with the stock sensor. So they know how this sensor acts bigger in this larger housing. And that's a neat thing because if you have an aftermarket like a Pro M MAF or any of those other ones, which I sell too, if that sensor goes bad, you throw that Pro M MAF out for $200 and you go buy another one. If this sensor goes bad, the housing did not. You couldn't kill this housing if you tried. So when this sensor goes bad and it's in a C&L housing, you just go get another Fox body sensor out of your buddy's car because they're probably throwing them away. Or go get one that's reman, or preferably just a good condition used Fox sensor. And 20 minutes later, you're back on the road. No buying a new MAF, no recalibration. And I think that's one of the hidden benefits of the C&L. I like that MAF because of that, but it's misunderstood and misused because people don't have any idea which sample tube goes in which MAF, or which air filter or cold air kit or whatever else it goes with. This has got the blue sample tube in it, which is for 24 pounds and a stock air box. There's also gold, black, purple, green, a couple other colors. The blue one is for a stock air box. If you have 24-pound injectors in a black sample tube, it's for a conical filter instead of the stock air box. So they actually make two 24-pound calibration tubes. That kind of stuff screws guys up and has been screwing guys up for 20 years. They think you can shove any Fox body sensor you want, or any sensor that you think is a Fox body sensor, into any housing you want with any color you want. And the biggest thing they focus on is, did I get the right sample tube? But they always forget to check out, do I even have a Fox body sensor? For example, about a year ago, I had a guy that I built a chip for, and I always ask him to provide the part number of the MAF they have, which is this guy right here, when I build a chip for him. And this guy had been struggling with his car for years, and he had I think it was a C&L mass air meter, but with a stock Fox sensor, or so he thought. Turns out it was a 4-cylinder Fox sensor. It looks identical to this one, it just has a different part number. So the electronic range on that sensor is about half as much, causing the sensor to make the car about twice as rich. And the guy had been fighting that for a couple of years. So here he's changing every expensive part on the car there is, And meanwhile, it's just a $25 used sensor that ultimately was his biggest hurdle to performance. When I'm building the chip, I always look at the details. I always make sure that I know every part, particularly the MAF and injectors, down to the part number that I'm working on. Because if I get those right, that goes an awful long ways towards guaranteeing the car actually runs right when you're done. And if you don't get those right, you will never make the car run right. It doesn't matter what you put on that chip. So pay attention to that. But I just want this to be a short video to show you guys the difference in the size of the MAFs, and you can see it firsthand, you know, exactly how much bigger the 76 type meters are. And the same thing's true with the Pro M75. It'll be a similar situation. Way bigger than stock. It's probably got twice as much effective area. I haven't done the math on the square inches area calculation, but this is a huge, huge difference in the physical size of the MAF. And I think that a MAF upgrade on a Fox body is probably one of the first things you should look at doing. Billy Brantley, how about SCT MAFs? How about them? They are 90 millimeter billet aluminum housings, which are pretty. They are loosely based on the Lightning mass airflow sensor, but they sometimes recalibrate them to a higher electronic range. Pro-M builds the sensor for SCT. You can get that sensor from either one of them with that calibration in it. So is it a good sensor? Yeah, if you have a 90 millimeter inlet tube and all that, which the 03 Cobra and Lightnings and those kind of cars do. 90 millimeters is about 3.54 inches of inside diameter inside the pipe. So the outside of the pipe is probably 3 3/4 or 4. These Fox bodies are largely based on 3-inch inlet pipes. So 3 inches is basically 76 millimeters is 2.992 inches. So Fox body guys, SN95 guys, 5 liters, their architecture is based on a 3-inch pipe. 3 inches, 76 millimeters, and that's why the guys at C&L made a 76. It is physically the largest thing you can put on a Fox that's going to fit, that still retains the 3-inch pipe architecture. I have used the Lightning style 90 millimeter, 3.5 inch meters and inlet tubes on some pretty serious Fox bodies. I'm thinking of a guy in Puerto Rico I did a chip for, and we converted everything over to 90 millimeters, including his 90 millimeter throttle body and a race intake. But the average Fox body, even if you wasted your time making the MAF and inlet 3.5 inches or 90 millimeters, what would happen is your throttle body would still be at best 75 millimeters, unless you have one of those race car type intakes, you know, like a Trick Flow Box R or, you know, one of the big boy intakes. So 75 millimeters is pretty much the upper limit of what the traditional bolt-on 5-liter intakes like Edelbrock and Trick Flow and Holly and all them guys make. The stock GT 40 type stuff is 68 millimeters, but it can be ported to 75. And the stock, you know, Mustang GT intake, it can't even go there. So at the very least, you want to put like a GT40 style intake on and port it, or use one of the aftermarket ones that already comes with a 75 millimeter hole from the factory. Anyway, that's why we don't go to the 90 millimeter stuff on a Fox body until you get into some really custom serious stuff. So I think that's it. I got to get back to work. I just wanted to show you guys the difference in these two mass air meters, and it's really not so obvious on paper when you say a guy needs a bigger MAF on a Fox body, but when you see it in person, it's a huge difference. All right, guys, talk to you later.